And as we said, we know about it because of Matt Taibbi, who has been at the center of it. He joins us tonight. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. So I would just offer to our audience your extensive reporting on this, which is on Twitter and on your Substack. But to summarize, having looked at these documents for weeks now, how deep was the penetration of Twitter by U.S. law enforcement and intel agencies?
I think we can say pretty conclusively after looking at tens of thousands of emails over the course of these weeks that the government was in the censorship business in a huge way. That's, I think, provable now. And not just one agency, really every conceivable wing of the enforcement agencies of the U.S. government were in some way or another sending moderation requests to Twitter. And in many cases, those requests were being fulfilled. And they were coming from everywhere, from every place from the NSA to the HHS to FBI, DHS, and even what they call other government agencies, which I think is code for the CIA. So we have reports from all over, from states, from police departments, everywhere.
So that's prima facie illegal. It's unconstitutional. Government cannot censor political speech. It could not be clearer. Our assumption is that this was made possible because of hysteria about Russian penetration of our politics. Is that your read of it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the thread that I put out yesterday traces the history of what happened, particularly in the fall of 2017. Twitter somewhat naively thought that they would not be sucked into the Russiagate phenomenon. They really thought this was going to be Facebook's problem alone. But when it started to become politically very difficult for them, and people like the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner, the senator of Virginia, put pressure on them. There's an email that talked about how he was pressuring them to, quote, keep producing material for them. Ultimately, Twitter ended up caving, and by the end of the year, they had an internal guidance, which I think is very significant, where they said publicly, we will only remove content at our sole discretion. Privately, we will remove content, any content that's identified by the United States intelligence community as a foreign state actor conducting cyber operations. So if the intel community says we take it down, we're going to take it down.
And of course, a lot of the people who were censored were not foreign state actors. In at least one case that you documented, this was a journalist. And I have to ask, there are a lot of different nonprofit organizations that purport to defend free speech on behalf of journalists. I won't even bother to name them, but there are a lot of them. Have any of them weighed in on this and raised holy hell?
No, and that's been a profound disappointment. For me personally, I gave to the ACLU for years. I'm one of those sort of dyed-in-the-wool liberals and grew up that way. I'm deeply disappointed. I think a lot of people who are sort of politically on that side of the aisle are missing the boat on this. They don't understand the gravity of the situation. They're thinking about this in partisan terms. It's not a partisan story. This is a story about the architecture of the intelligence community and law enforcement getting its hands on speech and on the ability of people to communicate with one another through platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And they're doing this in a very profound way, much more serious than I thought it was at the beginning of this story.
And in relative terms, Twitter is a smaller player. I mean, you have Facebook and Google that dwarf it in size. I mean, we've got to assume that those two companies are as penetrated as Twitter has been, don't we?
Yes, and there's evidence for that. Certainly, we've seen that they had what they called weekly or monthly industry meetings with the DHS and the FBI. And those included a number of companies, including Facebook, in some cases Wikipedia, Pinterest. There were a whole series of companies that were included in these communications. How deep the penetration goes in those other companies, I can't say, but I do know that they had very close communications. And in Twitter's case, the number of requests that came in was really overwhelming. Your previous guest, Michael Schellenberger, talked about how they were paid $3 million by the FBI. They were underpaid. They were doing so much work for the government in terms of reviewing these documents that they should have been compensated a lot more for their work.
How can it be a free society or a democracy if law enforcement and intel agencies are determining what we can say?
Well, people are hiding behind the fig leaf of, well, they didn't formally ask, they didn't demand that you do it, but how much of an ask is it really? How voluntary is it really when the FBI or the NSA or the CIA or the DHS comes to your company and presents you with an Excel spreadsheet of thousands of names and says, we assess that these accounts are linked to the Internet Research Agency and they're foreign threat actors? I think these companies feel enormous pressure to do the moderation, and the initial work that we've done proves that they did so.
Yeah. This is one. There are many problems that beset American society. This is a simple one to fix. Just ban it. Government agencies are not allowed to censor speech in the United States. I think it's a pretty easy thing to remedy. And we wouldn't know about it were it not for your efforts. Thank you, Matt Taibbi. Subscribe to the Fox News YouTube channel to catch our nightly opens, stories that are changing the world and changing your life. From Tucker Carlson tonight.